Facts Verse presents Stubborn People Who Refuse to Leave Their Homes No Matter What. Yep, we've all had one of those days, haven't we? One of those days where you just don't want to get out of bed. You might not be looking forward to the day's events, so you'd rather just stay under the covers. Some people are so burned out from a crazy week they just need another day to stay in bed and do absolutely nothing, just for their own sanity. Well, some people just don't feel like getting out, period. There are some people who will not leave their home for any reason. And there are some who are, well, hermits. They stay at home and they love it. And there are others who just can't leave their residence behind. Well, here we're going to show you 20 of the most stubborn people who refuse to leave their homes. First, help us spread the word about Facts First by clicking that like button, and also be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our future videos. Number 1. Ring road around a block of flats. The Chinese government offered money to a family to leave their home and relocate. Officials wanted to tear down their housing complex to build a ring road around it. The family refused the offer, and they decided to go ahead and allow the construction to take place around them. This resulted in a ring road having a nail house in the middle of it. A nail house is a home or a building that still stands because the occupants refuse to move. The modern road now has what the government calls an eyesore in the middle of it, a tower right there smack dab in the middle. Now, there was nothing they could do to force the family to move, so they've remained in their home in the middle of the ring road. Number 2. The Holdout farm in the middle of a Japanese airport. There was something very odd in the middle of Narita Airport. Right there in the middle of the Japanese airport is a farm. The owners of the farm refused to sell their land to the airport, and they were so stubborn that they didn't even mind the sounds of the planes taking off and landing. Well, they might not like those sounds, but they're not letting it push them off their land. There are also about 90 planes that fly over that farm daily. The airport opened in 1978, and there were some violent protests. They had to compromise by putting in just one runway instead of the 3 that they had planned on. The local farmers just refused to leave, and they have guarded their farms with their lives ever since. In 2005, the government finally declared a truce. Number 3. The 4-lane highway built around 2 apartment buildings when residents refused to move. Here is another Chinese construction nightmare. A $15 million road project was scheduled, and they were going to build a 4-lane highway. The only problem was that people in 2 apartment buildings refused to leave. Their homes were in the city of Yonggi, and there's a curve in the highway now where the apartment buildings stand because they just couldn't create a road through it. Number 4. Chinese highway built around a farm. The Dongying China Road was built, but there's a farm blocking the road. The owners of the farm say the government didn't offer them enough money to move, so they didn't. If you're in a small car, you can still go around the farm. Trucks, though, are forced to find different routes. There's not enough room. Since the farm doesn't show up on GPS either, trucks and larger vehicles, they're often forced to turn around and go in the opposite direction on the wrong side of the road to find an alternate route. They're not giving any prior notice that they're about to hit a house. Number 5. The House of Austin Spriggs. Austin Spriggs owned a rundown building in an up-and-coming neighborhood in Washington. He was offered millions of dollars to move so that the developers could build luxury condos in the area, but he didn't want to move. He wanted to open a pizza restaurant in his own building. Well, the developers still built their condos right around the rundown building. The restaurant didn't take off, and Austin Spriggs was foreclosed on, and now nobody wants to buy the building, and he has missed out on millions of dollars. Poor guy. You know, sometimes it's just better to take the money. Number 6. Salah Oudjani refuses to sell coffee house. In northern France, there was only one house in the neighborhood of Roubaix. The man owned Café Chez Salah. The building survived an air raid during the war. It was worn, it was run down, but it still stood upright. Salah ran the coffee house for 46 years, and the area is all run down. There are plans to revitalize the neighborhood, which would be completed by 2022. Salah says he's not going to sell the building, though, and he will continue to run his business with all the construction going on around him. Number 7. Gate Tower Building in Osaka. This building is 16 stories high, but it's different than most high-rises. There's a tunneled highway running through the middle of the tower. The Hanshin Expressway on-ramp goes directly through the building. The final product was a compromise between the government and the building owners. Number 8. St. Joseph Catholic Church in San Antonio. The people in this area can go to church and then afterwards walk just a few feet and start shopping. In 1944, the department store Yostke's wanted to buy the church to build a shopping complex, but the church refused. So the building was built around the church, which I'm guessing makes worship kind of weird. You cannot serve both God and money, but the money can surround people of God, I guess. Number 9. The Chinese man's home that ended up at the bottom of a giant pit when he refused to sell. This man refused to leave his property, and so this is what the government did. The government offered the Yang family money to move their home, and for the Yangs it just wasn't enough money being offered. The government had plans for that land, but the owner refused to sell. The government wanted to build an industrial park. Well, now that home is sitting at the bottom of the pit, and the family has no water or electricity. They can't afford to move, so they're living a Luddite-like lifestyle. They take water from the rivers and burn candles for light. Man, I'd hate to see what happens during flooding season. Number 10. Randall Acker refused to sell his house. In downtown Portland, there lives a lawyer who is pretty happy with his life. He was offered to sell his home so that college dorms could be built, but he refused. They started building around him, and people told him that his home looked like the house in the movie Up. Well, because of that, he decided to take some inspiration, and he flies hundreds of helium balloons in his house now. When the college students move in, Acker might change his mind, though, about his living situation. Number 11. Edith Macefield. This was the actual house that was the inspiration for the movie Up. It's been bought by the Ballards Blocks development, and for a while Edith refused to sell her house. She finally gave in, and her home will be turned into a place for pop-up restaurants. Number 12. Mary Cook. Mary Cook refused to sell her home while all the others around her were being torn down, and today her home is wedged between two apartment buildings. Number 13. Vera Coking. Vera lived in Atlantic City, and she loved her home. When Donald Trump wanted to expand his hotel and casino and offered Vera $1 million for her home back in the 1980s, she refused. Well, when she refused, his $4 million offer came. But nope, she still didn't want it, so they built around her home. She even sued him after being injured outside her home on construction materials. Today, she lives in a retirement home in Florida, and her home has been demolished. Number 14. Melbourne House. A homeowner who lived on Kingsway in Melbourne refused to sell his house so that condos would be built there. Well, that didn't stop the developers. They built right around his house. Silverleaf Condos was built on both sides of the home. It defeats the purpose of owning a single-family house. The homeowner stood his ground for a few years, but finally he decided to sell his house to the condo complex, and he moved far away. I don't blame him. Number 15. Toronto Duplex. There is a house on St. Patrick Street in downtown Toronto that used to be a duplex. The owner on one side agreed to sell, but the other side, the owner there, didn't want to sell. So half of a duplex was torn down and an apartment complex was built. The other half of the duplex, it remains, and it is a real sight to see. Had one person owned both sides of the duplex, this wouldn't have been an issue. Since each owner paid for their own half, though, the developers didn't have much of a choice but to cut the house in half. Number 16. Gothic-inspired townhouse. It's tough to tell here which building came first. The apartments were pre-war developments which don't give the townhouse much room. The townhouse doesn't look like it belongs, but the owners, they seem to love it there. Number 17. The house under the bridge. A family in Zurich refused to move, even when they found out that there was going to be a highway and a bridge built over their home, and it remained there for years, and the residents just dealt with the constant noise of the traffic. Day in, day out, the family had to listen to the cars and trucks, breathe in the exhaust fumes that were common for highway underpass. Well, finally it just became too much for them, and they decided to leave. The house has since been torn down. There is nothing standing now where the house once was, which is how it should have been to begin with. The family needed a major change, and so they moved out to the quiet countryside. Number 18. The owners who wouldn't sell to the hotel. When the Victoria Hotel was being built, they couldn't afford to buy two small homes that they wanted to demolish. They ended up building around the homes. There were families living in these two homes for years after the hotel was built. Finally, though, the hotel had money to buy out the owners after several years of the hotel being in business and guests checking in. Now they had the money that they needed to buy them out. So they bought out the owners, but the hotel kept the homes and are now using them as souvenir stores. This is a great story. There are photos in the lobby letting guests learn a bit more about the history of the hotel and the homes. Number 19. House surrounding luxury villas. In Suzhou, Jiangsu Province, there is a complex of luxury villas, and between there is a lone house. The owner refused to sell his property, and the developers agreed to leave some greenery so that it would still look nice. The developers had an idea of exactly what they wanted the complex to look like. By leaving a nice yard around the single house, they were still able to give the neighborhood a luxury look. The owners of the house were glad that the developers accommodated them the way they did. Number 20. Family refuses to move their family's ancient graves. Okay, this isn't really a home, but it's still an interesting story. The Chinese, they're very serious when it comes to their dead ancestors, and one family refused to move their loved ones' graves for a luxury apartment to be built in its place. The graveyard stuck out, but finally a deal was reached and the graves were moved. Subscribe for more.